Alright, the Midnight Overhaul is here. Every single DPS spec in the game getting changed and rebuilt from the ground up. Buttons are gone, talent trees are changed. Some specs came out better than ever, but others, they're in serious trouble. In today's video, we're going to be going through every DPS spec in Midnight so far to break down who's winning, who's flopping, and what specs you should actually be keeping your eye on as we progress toward launch day. Also, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to stick around until the end of the video to see how you can earn a free Epic Edition of World of Warcraft Midnight from the Comeback Kids. Starting off first, we have Unholy Death Knight. Now, Unholy has been basically torn down and rebuilt from the ground up, and honestly, it's probably one of, if not the biggest winner in this entire video. The biggest change is that Festering Wounds is gone. Instead of babysitting wound stacks with a bunch of add-ons, Festering Strike now just empowers your Scourge Strike to summon lesser ghouls. Now, that's pretty much the new core loop. Instead of tracking hidden buffs, you're just raising an army of the dead, which is awesome. You've also got a new spender called Putrefy, which lets you sacrifice your oldest ghoul and make it explode. You could pair it with a couple talents to make it better, but in particular, you have one that when it explodes, it actually rises again as a skeletal mage, which is absolutely awesome. When it comes to your diseases, you're now running two of them now, which is Virulent Plague, which keeps its, same old cleave identity, while you also have the new Dread Plague, which is a heavy single target damage over time effect, and these aren't just, sort of fire and forget abilities. Scourge Strike makes them tick faster, while Death Coil and Epidemic extend their duration. Also, Army of the Dead is juiced up now. It's back on a shorter 1.5 minute cooldown, so you're flooding the field with ghouls consistently. You also have a capstone called Forbidden Knowledge, which takes it even further. While Army of the Dead is active, your Death Coil and Epidemic transform into darker, upgraded versions that let you unload some really nice AoE or cleave damage potential. It feels like a true, big power spike cooldown usage moment. Overall, I'm really loving Unholy. I think they knocked it out of the park with this spec in terms of with just overall theme and gameplay style. Unholy isn't this wound, boring spreadsheet spec anymore. It's a proper necromancer Army of the Dead fantasy. You're raising ghouls, you're exploding them, you're summoning them back up as mages. You have all your minions coming out. It's a really awesome spec. Very straightforward now. Very explosive, great spec overall. Moving on next, we do have, surprisingly, the Elemental Shaman. And listen, I'm going to put this plain and simple. This class is doing phenomenal right now on the alpha. They absolutely killed it. They pruned the spec down, I think, the perfect amount compared to some of the other casters in the game. And the biggest highlight, I would say, to take away is the brand new Voltaic Blaze ability. It allows you to shoot AoE Lava Burst every 15 seconds or so. And if you've ever played Elemental Shaman, a very satisfying moment is when you pop Ascendance and all those Lava Bursts goes out. It's a very awesome thing. So getting the opportunity to do this very consistently is really satisfying. Awesome button and just general gameplay rotation here. You follow that up with now you have, your elementals going on at once. I personally like to pair this up with the Farseer talent tree, having ancestors out with me at the same time on the battlefield. Helps me really, lean into that shaman thing, and it's just a chef's kiss in my opinion. The rotation is smooth, and the talent tree did get some changes, but nothing that's going to absolutely blindside you. It's all very similar gameplay styles. They just tuned it up, tightened everything up to make it a little bit more straightforward, and I think they knocked it out of the park. Elemental Shaman wasn't a spec that needed an overhaul. The rotation and base game design on their hero talent trees and base talent tree is good as is. So them just tightening things up and giving them a once around with the pruning like every other class in the game for Midnight, I think it did them very well. Very excited for Elemental Shaman. Easily one of, if not the best caster overall on the Midnight Alpha. Next up, I think with the biggest surprise on this list, we have Devastation. And I'm just going to say it, they flat out killed it with this spec. This isn't a spec that I really loved to play in the past, but jumping into it was so easy on the Midnight. This spec didn't need a massive overhaul, but what we did get was a very well-polished, streamlined facelift, and this spec is doing great. It's very fun. The red side of the tree finally has the clarity and the power that it always needed. Instead of just juggling a bunch of awkward procs and, trying to time up those perfect consume flame windows, Fire Breath is now your true centerpiece. It's like what stitches everything together, and it feels really good to use. You also get 2 charges of Fire Breath now, which is nice, and it feeds directly into your, normal damage cycle. Consume Flame is a big one that got changed. It is now a passive ability where every time you pyre a target, affected by fire breath, it automatically triggers, so there's no extra buttons needed, and that means, you know, your damage detonates very naturally and it's very fluid, no cooldown waiting, just very smooth and explosive output. You also have a new talent called Strafing Run, which gives you 2 deep breaths in 18 seconds, so not only is this a super thematic talent, it's pretty core to your rotation at this point, and it keeps up some very key buffs through all of Devastation's kit, like Imminent Destruction, all of your important Scale Commander hero talents, and anything else going on. I will say the real juice here is that Scale Commander hero talent tree. It is peak design with their brand new spec talent tree. Because of your double deep breath, you have the bombardment cooldown reduction talents. You're literally casting deep breath every 10 to 15 seconds. And every time you do, you're dealing a ton of damage, you're activating a bunch of buffs, and you're setting up some very big damage cooldown windows. And getting to use deep breath every 15 seconds, Shattering Star is baked into Eternity Surge, so you have a really nice natural gameplay loop. I will just say the entire kit of Devastation just flows substantially better now. Less button bloat, easier and tighter combos, a very, very great spec overall. And I think this is a perfect example of how every class design should be in World of Warcraft. Your abilities feel thematic, they're impactful, fun to press, damage is good. Great choice for a spec so far. I'm loving them on Midnight Alpha so far. Back to back, we got another ginormous surprise with the Windwalker Monk. Now, I did not expect this spec to come out swinging this hard, but damn, Blizzard crushed it. First off, Storm, Earth, and Fire is completely gone. It's deleted, and good riddance in my opinion. That button has been a mess for years, and it's replaced now by actual meaningful damage cooldown and just general rotation improvement windows. I would say the biggest win overall is that haste is a very important stat for them now, as well as critical strike. For the first time, you have a ton of your talents and abilities that scale off your haste, and overall it's very solid for them, and I think it's going to allow them to scale into the future throughout an expansion really well. You have multiple talents that will increase your haste and increase your, you know, total combat viability. That adds up to a ton of haste, big damage Fist of Fury, and it feels really good. The rotation is also buttery smooth, like usual with Windwalker. Easily one of the cleanest feeling melee specs I've touched on the entirety of the alpha. And also a big rework was to their Weapons of Order cooldown. It's a cooldown that now turns Blackout Kick into a nice little chi generator instead of a spender. You basically alternate between using Blackout Kick, some of your heavy hitters like Fist of Fury, Rising Sun Kick, Spinning Crane Kick, while your resources and energy top off over the duration. So it's fast, it's fluid, and when the moment ends, you're refueled with everything topped off and ready to go again for big damage. Talking about Shadow Pan, because you did get some changes here, they rework Flurry Strikes pretty much to activate only when Fist of Fury is casted, and every hit builds towards summoning and increasing the damage of a Shadow Pan fighter. So when you use your Weapons of Order, you summon a Shadow Pan fighter, they deal some damage. Good flavor in terms of theme for the spec, and the visuals are really cool. So overall, Shadow Pan is a nice little W. Conduit of Celestial still has your Celestial Conduit activation ability, and the whole thing revolves around Heart of the Jade Serpent, which buffs your cooldown recovery, gives Fist of Fury a faster cast, and you pair that with all the brand new haste that we're prioritizing, and you're pretty much just stacking a super speed, Super Saiyan ability rotation that feels really fun. Bottom line is that Windwalker got a complete glow up. I could talk about this spec for another 10 minutes, but I will say overall, really good direction it's heading in. The stat bonuses and the changes to that are fantastic. The rotation feels very fluid, and the build variety between Shadow Pan and Celestials is meaningful still yet again. This spec finally scales properly. Really excited as one of the better melee heading into the new expansion. Now, if Blizzard had a poster child for the class pruning thing, I think Enhancement Shaman would be that spec. It was a spec that was overloaded with random utility, buttons, awkward damage fillers, but finally that trims this spec down, this expansion, where your damage is now back to being about Storm Strike and Lava Lash. You also have a brand new talent called Ride the Lightning that makes you cast free Chain Lightnings in AoE when you use these abilities. Not only is the damage really impactful, of course, but visually, it's really awesome. They also rework Crash Lightning to have it give you multiple effects after you cast it, which feel way better. And then Voltaic Blaze is here permanently on your bars, and it's not going anywhere. So no more trying to spread flame shocks. You just press Voltaic Blaze, forget it, and move on to your damage. On top of that, one of my favorite changes is that your weapon imbuements actually matter. They deal pretty good damage, and with the addition of Sundering and Primordial Storm being combined into one button, It's a nice bursty 1-2 punch combo in AoE that feels very nice. The bottom line is that Enhancement still has all of the awesome visuals that it had before, but they cut down everything substantially. They trimmed the fat. They made it a spec that feels good to go about its rotation yet again. It feels like older Enhancement Shaman rather than a Fury Warrior copy-paste where you're just spamming things left and right. Really excited for Enhancement in the future. Next up, even for Druid though, we do have to talk about Feral because they're getting a big shakeup in Midnight. Bleed snapshotting is pretty much gone, and they made everything a lot less complicated when it comes to your bleeds and empowering them. Blizzard even added UI indicators so that you can see your bleeds and when they're empowered, meaning that you don't need weak ores anymore, which it's going to be gone from the game anyways, so that's a W. Another big one is that Blood Talents is gone. This was always a pain in the ass to try to keep up, in my opinion, and it forced you into this awkward like mini game trying to get 3 different spells off, and you never knew which one you needed to press. Now you have straightforward buffs like Lacerating Claws and Blood Spattered, which makes your bleeds and bites hit way harder in a very clear way. They also picked up some new spells like Frantic Frenzy is a multi-target Feral Frenzy ability where you blur between enemies and slash them all at once, and then you have Chomp, which is a new bite style button that you only use when you're low on energy, which can fill out those gaps of low APM when Feral is energy starved. Numbers wise, Swipe got nerfed and Thrash got buffed, which pushes your AoE back toward bleed spreading instead of just spamming Swipe. Listen, the bottom line is that Feral is shedding the whole complicated spreadsheet style of micromanagement like snapshotting and getting the Blood Talents and all these buffs going. All of that BS is gone. It's less perfect rotation or bust. It's more pounce, bleed, dart between targets, tear them apart. I think that's a lot better. We can all agree that we'd rather change this, and Midnight is helping them out substantially, so I'm really excited for Feral for the first time in a very long time. Moving on next to a very big surprise though, additionally, we have the Arms Warrior. Now, we do have to be honest, Arms was in a very bad spot at the end of the War Within. It was clunky, undertuned, and you're juggling a bunch of tiny micro buffs, and it was just a pain in the ass more than anything. So when it comes to updates, any update could have been an upgrade for them. But Midnight has taken them very, very far into the future. The biggest win is that Colossus Smash is pretty much just Warbreaker now. Of course, you press this, everything's vulnerable, but then it also can activate Sweeping Strikes for you passively in one button, so you could just go right about your rotation. Mastery also got simplified too. It straight up just deal more damage with the two-hander, and then you add in the fact that Deep Wounds is being now a passive bleed again based off crits like in Classic. Suddenly, Arms has a very clear identity now. It's slow, heavy hits that leave enemies gushing and bleeding out, which is awesome. Your Sweeping Strikes is cleaner. Instead of awkward uptime, you get a fixed number of empowered swings now, and Slam could even be part of your rotation now. There are some new passives that make it buff your next Mortal Strike. It can make your Slam automatically crit, and then have it even refund charges of overpowered if it does. The bottom line is that Arms went from probably one of the weakest specs in the game to having one of the biggest glow-ups in Midnight so far. Very excited for some of their new utility, all these new talents, and they have a really nice class theme, which is just swinging a giant two-handed hammer and hitting people as hard as possible. Believe it or not, now moving on to next, we have the Demonology Warlock. The whole rotation feels a bit different, but in a very good way. Before, it was every other global just being Hand of Gul'dan to try to summon imps to build up for your next Tyrant window. Now, that's gone. Imps live a flat 40 seconds, and Tyrant is no longer the only thing holding your rotation together. Now you're really a true master of demons. The talent splits into 2 paths. One side is all about the imps and dumping them with Hand of Gul'dan, imploding them the second you reach your cap, and then letting that fuel your demonic cores so they can shoot out in explosive fashion. The other side focuses on your heavy hitters, which are your empowered Dreadstalkers, as well as your Felguard. The rotation for Demonology at this point is so fleshed out and very fluid with each other. One ability will lead you into a proc, which will then activate something else, which will then empower your demons, so on and so forth. And through all of it, you're also flooding the battlefield with a ton of demons. There is no micromanaging involved anymore. There's no more spamming Hand of Gul'dan every other global cooldown. It feels fantastic. Also, your new Apex talent is called Dominion of Argus, which juices up your Felguard and Dreadstalkers, and occasionally you summon a Dominion of Argus to come out and channel a bunch of AoE damage on an enemy, which is insane thematically. To put it simply, the bottom line, this spec is in a great spot. The pacing is solid, the rotation isn't complicated anymore, and layered with a bunch of weak auras that you need to track. All of this nails the Demon Commander fantasy better than ever. Absolutely a big win for this spec. Moving on next, we do have to bring up the Affliction Warlock. Now, I will say as a Warlock, really like connoisseur and enjoyer, I think stepping away from Malefic Rapture and going toward a full damage over time and drain gameplay style is 100% way to go, and they did that in Midnight. They turned Affliction from a burst spec with Malefic Rapture after you get your DOS off to now a full drain and damage over time effect caster that feels really nice to play, I will say, overall. Now, they did address the elephant in the room, which was Vile Taint, and by addressing it, that means they simply just they got rid of Vile Taint entirely. Blizzard, of course, is pruning down a lot of these classes in Midnight, and Affliction did get hit with a couple of these. So now they have a passive that's baked in to where your Agony will now apply to 2 targets and spread at once. So it is pretty nice in terms of getting that going, and it's not too long of a ramp, and you're not holding on and waiting for Vile Taint. So additionally, because now you're a dot-based spec, you will at least still deal pretty good damage while you're getting this up and running and going. So it's not a terrible thing. Now, something also to note is that resource management, I will say for Affliction Warlock, is not a problem ever on Affliction. I'm constantly flooded with too many shards to where I cannot spend them fast enough, and I can't tell if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not really sure yet. I don't know what the damage numbers are supposed to be looking like on alpha overall, but I'm constantly floating around 4 to 5 shards, and I'm even spamming Seed of Corruption, so I think it's a little bit goofy, and I think they need to tune some things up there. I do love the fact that, you know, getting rid of Malefic Rapture has its focus on our 2 spenders. Of course, you have your Unstable Affliction, which is your single target, and then you have your AoE spender being Seed of Corruption. Very, very nice overall to have these 2, and I think it makes Affliction, you know, significantly more viable, I think, in both rating and Mythic Plus, and hell, I'll even say it, even PvP. I think the class fantasy is absolutely there, bringing them back to their roots of being drains, you know, sucks and souls and all that fun stuff. I think that's what Affliction has always been about. They're doing a really good job in terms of design, and I'm really excited to see how this spec progresses through the alpha as we get more levels, stats, and everything like that. Moving on next, we have the Outlaw Rogue. Now, I will say Outlaw, I think they got some decent quality of life changes, but overall, I'm not sold entirely yet. The big one is that roll the bones, it's finally less random. You don't re-roll for these big, you know, 6 proc rolls anymore. You get a single buff that is supposed to upgrade the longer it's active. Now, I think this is bugged on the alpha because right now when I continuously use it, it doesn't increase in the rolls. So I'm hoping it's still not tied to RNG. If it is, this spec is still, I'm going to throw it in the dumpster. I am over that whole RNG thing. I'm hoping this is bugged. But anyways, I will say if that is the case, it is much cleaner, and the mechanic itself could be really, really cool. Moving on, the new loop mostly revolves around chaining between the eyes still as much as possible. One of the Apex talents resets between the eyes' cooldowns, it guarantees max damage, and that will proc after you dispatch enough. So now you're trying to stack these moments of big between the eyes windows back to back, and I think it's a pretty cool gameplay interaction, but there are some RNG aspects baked into the kit still, yet again, which leaves you to have these moments where it's like, oh man, this time I'm feeling really good, the damage is good, and then there are other times where things feel really slow. And this type of stuff, I think it's just exhausting for me to seeing it happen over and over again with Outlaw. I will admit the new Killing Spree animation looks incredible, it feels really good, and they're leaning a little bit harder into that pirate theme. But the truth of the matter is, I think flavor-wise, it only goes so far when Blade Flurry is still the core AoE mechanic for this class. This right here is usually the nail in the coffin for me with Outlaw. I think Blade Flurry is really lazy design, it's boring, you press it, and it feels like classic TBC or Wrath of the Lich King World of Warcraft. It doesn't feel like modern WoW. I will say the bottom line is that Outlaw definitely plays cleaner, and it feels cool still yet again, and the class theme is leaning into that more and more by the day. I also think the bursty, you know, between the eyes, big chunky windows can be fun, but I do think it still has an identity crisis yet again. The pirate flavor is coming through, but the gameplay elements, I'm just not loving it. It still feels like it's trapped in older versions of World of Warcraft. Moving on next to one of the biggest overhauls, we have Shadow Priest. Now, both mechanically and thematically, Blizzard is doubling down on old god vibes with tentacles, madness, and apparitions baked into the core kit. Now, visual and fantasy, this looks really cool. I think it's heading in the right direction. It's been rethemed. Devouring Plague is gone. It's replaced by Shadow Word Madness, which deals some burst damage, a little heavy dot, and automatically spawns an apparition. Shadow Crash is now a tentacle slam, literally summoning a void appendage that slams the ground, spreads all your dots and stuff like that. Additionally, Void Form got simplified. No more confusion between Void Eruption or Void Form. It's just Void Form. That last 20 seconds gives a flat damage buff and doesn't reset your charges. Additionally, when it comes to the rotation, it got a bit cleaned up. There's fewer random procs to chase, and the Surge of Insanity is streamlined into just buffing Mind Flayed damage and Insanity gain instead of overloading you with too many procs and windows and stuff. Their Apex talent, the Void Apparitions, causes your idle effects will now conjure these little apparitions that come out and deal some damage. Sometimes they show up as little void apparitions that shoot void bolts. And then Tentacle Slam always will proc an idle effect. So you're constantly pumping out, you know, your void friends and your idols to come out in combat, which I think is a pretty cool gameplay style. Bottom line is that Shadow's Midnight rework, it leans a lot into that old god spec. If you're not into that sort of thing with tentacles and madness and old god theme, you're probably not going to like it compared to, you know, the old Void theme that they had not too long ago. I think it's pretty cool. Mechanically, it is a bit cleaner, and the damage is concentrated in fewer, bigger moments. I still just worry about their AoE damage profile being tied to Psychic Link and everything like that. Okay, now time for the new kid on the block, Devourer Demon Hunter. Now, honestly, I think this spec feels pretty damn good. It's one of the flashier classes in World of Warcraft now, and unusually, it's a mid-range spec, so it's kind of new to me. Technically, it's a ranged DPS, but it still plays, you know, similar to a Demon Hunter. You're zipping around, flying around fast, quickly and stuff, building Fury, and then boom, you ship into that Void Metamorphosis form, start dumping off a bunch of collapsing stars that are pretty much like a mini nuclear bomb that you drop on people, which is nuts. The gameplay loop is pretty cool. You build your Fury, get your soul fragments going, go into Cosmic God mode, and you see how long you can maintain that state. It seems pretty simple on paper, but if you manage your resources well, you can extend it for a very, very long time, and it rewards some smart play, so I think it's really interesting there. There's a couple different build types with a range version that's meant to keep you in meta for as long as you can, and then you have a melee version with Fellscarred that's about high mobility and burst damage consistently, and then flipping out with Vengeful Retreat. Overall, I don't think the spec is perfect by all means. I still think it needs some reworks and improvements in some areas, but it's the first iteration of Alpha, so we'll see how things go moving forward. Overall, though, I think the bottom line is that it's a cool spec, definitely a great addition to the game. I think thematically, gameplay-wise, it fits the new modern style of WoW, so I'm excited overall for Devourer. Moving on next, we do have to talk about the Havoc Demon Hunter. Now, they didn't get an overhaul like a lot of specs, but it's definitely in a decent spot. I don't think it's like phenomenal. Let's start with the biggest shift. Essence Break is finally dead. It no longer buffs Blade Dance or Chaos Strike substantially, which means we're probably going to be saying goodbye to that and sort of avoiding that ability, which I think has been holding Havoc hostage for a good amount of time now. Instead, Essence Break now just adds flat damage for a few seconds. Not terrible, but it's clearly not center of the build anymore. Bell Barrage is gone. Sigil of Flame is gone. Removed from Havoc entirely, and the tree has been cleaned up, I would say, in a better state than it was before. One of the biggest changes is how Glaive Tempest work. It's now a passive, and after you hit Blade Dance on 4 targets, it will just drop Glaive Tempest automatically, which is pretty cool. You don't have to track it. You just press your buttons, go about your rotation, you'll get more damage. The defensive kit also got a nice little glow-up blur, now gives you a 25% damage reduction, and it passively activates Netherwalk for 2.5 seconds, giving you a mini little, you know, immunity every single minute, which I think it's really good for certain raid mechanics and Mythic Plus, and even big burst windows that are scary in PvP. When it comes to the AoE rotation, Student of Suffering is now tied to I-Beam instead of Sigil of Flame, and it gives you your bonus Mastery and Fury regen, so it is a lot easier to understand, and it feels worth it doing the whole I-Beam thing, but it's doing it, you know, just way more consistently, and there's just less filler going on with the spec, which I don't know if Havoc needed that so much because it was already straightforward, but it's really good. I think what's missing also, of course, we have to talk about the Apex talent. It hasn't been added yet, so I can't give this one an honest, fair judgment and assessment. I'm putting it in the B tier because we're still waiting on those Apex talents and final tuning. Overall, I think Havoc did get cleaned up. Essence Break is gone. Glaive Tempest is a passive now, and Blur is actually a really good defensive now. Moving on next, we do have to talk about the Subtlety Rogue. Now, Subtlety didn't get blown up like some specs, but it did get streamlined, and I do think it's in a good way to where it's very close to being neck and neck with Outlaw. If you liked the spec before, you still feel right at home, but now it's a bit more forgiving. You still have your cooldown stacking gameplay that makes sub, the high skill expression. You line up your Shadow Dance with your Symbols of Death, as well as Shadow Blades and stuff like that. But the big change is that Blizzard stripped out a lot of the punishing buff alignment that made sub kind of hard to play. For example, Symbols of Death now only buffs finisher damage, not all of your damage. And you've also got a slick new version of Shuriken Tornado, which pretty much it's completely passive. And after you click Shuriken Storm, it will automatically trigger another Shuriken Storm about a second and a half later. So what that means is that you press the button, you dump a finisher, and then boom, it will press it again automatically and allow you to do another finisher back to back, which is really, really nice. So no wasted globals, no awkward delay, just smooth, satisfying AoE pacing. Really, really good stuff. And that's the direction I think the whole spec seems to be heading. Find Weakness is also a self buff instead of a debuff, which is really cool, which removes, the tracking clutter and trying to see who has what. And in terms of gameplay style, I still think Deathstalker feels more engaging than Trickster. They didn't change these talent trees pretty much at all. And since you're getting all these new finishers from your brand new AoE kit, it feels really good to get this off every few, global cooldowns with your Deathstalker's Mark 3rd proc, which is really good. There are also a couple passive talents that boost your Rupture and your Black Powder damage, of course, so you're not just repeating your single target rotation in terms of AoE, so I think it's a lot more fun in terms of AoE damage with Deathstalker, but of course we'll see how that heads throughout the alpha. One thing I don't like about Sub Rogue is that their Apex talent feels visually empty. I mean, the idea of it has like a shadow clone that can come out and help you and duplicate some abilities, and I think that's really awesome when it comes to class theme, but you barely even see it when it happens. It's very, very faint, and I want it to be, indicated a little bit better visually. The bottom line is that Sub still plays like that bursty, stealthy rogue with a ton of outplay potential, but now the rotation's a little less overwhelming and way more satisfying to flow through. Really, really excited. I think Sub Rogue is on its way. Moving up next, we do have the Beast Mastery Hunter. Now, it did get cleaned up a little bit this expansion. No huge rework, but a couple of key abilities we have to go through. First things first, Multi-Shot is gone. It's replaced by an ability called Wild Thrash, a new pet-based AoE attack that activates Beast Cleave and Kill Cleave. So instead of just spamming Multi-Shot every few globals to, keep your cleave going, you now use this, and it's a little bit better. Bestial Wrath also now has a flat 30-second cooldown with talents. Now, none of that, sort of variable reset nonsense. It still gives you really good uptime, but now it's just easier to track. You activate it, and in 30 seconds it's coming. You don't have to get procs and stuff like that. They also cleaned up some weird tracking stuff, like Barb Shot is now a rolling bleed, and you don't have to worry about overriding dots or perfectly spacing each shot, so that's nice. And then a lot of passives just got simplified. Like Frenzy is just a flat attack speed buff. Bloodshed is your main summon style cooldown, now since that Call of the Wild is gone. And then Brutal Companion, Scent of Blood, and Jagged Wounds all just give you straightforward boost to pet damage or bleeds. There's also a talent in there called War Orders that makes Barb Shot reset the cooldown to kill command, so it's a nice little 1-2 punch combo, very fluid. I think Beast Mastery is back to being still, yet again, the pet commander spec. I think that's what it should be. There's no fluff. It's not too complicated. No RNG resets. Just straightforward, simple tracking, 1-2 punch combos. And I think that's what an easier spec in World of Warcraft should be. And I think they did a really good job with Beast Mastery so far. Not much to say. Moving on next, we do have, surprisingly, Balanced Druid. I was really hoping Balance was going to get some updates, and they're finally here. The old version was all about, having your uptime with your Eclipse, trying to get in that as fast as you possibly can by casting, and then spamming your Starfall as much as possible for Mythic Plus. Now, at this point, Eclipse is a button that you control. It lasts 15 seconds on a 30-second cooldown, but you can get it up to 2 charges. Instead of just scrambling to keep it rolling, you decide when you want to pop it. That means you can line it up with, all the ads coming out and now they're finally grouped up, burn phases, or you just unload it when you want to feel powerful, which is cool. Mastery is also way cleaner. It no longer needs dots to do its job. Instead, it just flat out buffs your arcane and nature damage. You'll still keep Sunfire and Moonfire rolling, but now you don't feel useless if they drop for even a second. The new Ascendant Eclipses capstone talent makes the windows even spicier. You have your first Star Surge or Starfall hit harder, crits start spreading dots for you, and just pressing the Eclipse button, shoots out solar or lunar bolts for you, so the second you press your Eclipse, you're pretty much locked in, ready to go. Balance has shifted from a spec that's all about spamming Starfall to burst windows that you now control every so often. You prep with damage over time effects and your astral power, then you pop your Eclipse, and then you let all hell rain loose. It's a way less stressful way to play the spec and way more intentional. Very excited for balance. Moving on next, we have the Marksman Hunter, and I think this spec got some pretty good targeted changes. Not a total rework, but enough to give it a much clearer direction. Marksman is still the spec you know, it's just leaning harder into that slow but deadly style of gameplay, similar to Arms Warrior. The biggest change is that Streamline is gone. That's the talent that used to make aim shot cast faster, but Blizzard straight up removed it. And the reason for that is because they want aim shot to feel like a big, deliberate hit. Something that you commit to, not just weave in, you know, as quick filler or anything like that. To make up for it, they also buffed aim shot's damage by a bunch, and talents like Tensile Bowstring now reduce the cast time, the focus cost during True Shot, so you're not stuck waiting around every time. You still hit hard, you just pick your moments, you know, every so often. They're also pulling Marksman away from old borrow power stuff like Explosive Shot and leaning more into, you know, the classic fantasy. Kill Shot, Volley, Rapid Fire. Kill Shot is now also only exclusive to Marksman, by the way, which is interesting. So no longer in the base Hunter tree. It's literally Marksman's execute, period. Nothing's going to change that. There's also a lot of tuning on some of their abilities to increase and decrease the damage and the cooldowns and stuff. This is all subject to change. The bottom line is that Marksman is going back to its roots, bigger aim shots, big kill shots, and just a cleaner, little bit more readable rotation. Very fluid either way, lining up those big cooldown windows and punishing with honestly some of the highest burst I've seen on the alpha so far. If you like the fantasy of marksmanship before, this is probably the best it's felt in a good minute. Moving on next, we do have to talk about the Retribution Paladin. Now, Ret is still feeling great going into midnight. There's no real surprise here. This spec was already in a really good spot, and instead of trying to reinvent it, Blizzard just cleaned it up a bit. The biggest change is that Executioner Sentence and Final Reckoning are now one button. You don't have to choose between them anymore, so you just press it, it activates both of them eventually, and you're good to go. Crusading Strikes is also gone. The passive where, you know, it gives you your holy power, that is gone. It is now changed into Templar Strikes, which is basically a 1-2 punch builder. It feels pretty good because there's a talent that causes it to be AoE, so it doesn't feel terrible to press at times. Divine Hammer is now also part of the Templar hero talent tree, where it shows up as a passive AoE source, so you're not actively pressing it anymore. It just spins around you every so often, which is pretty good. Damage-wise, they made it clear where they want your power to go to, and that seems to be Blade of Justice. Blade of Justice is going to be one of your harder hitting abilities heading into midnight due to your Apex talents tying into it as well. So instead of, you know, your builders doing all the work, your payoff is now going to be also your spenders with Templar's Verdict, Divine Storm, and stuff like that. I think the animations and everything for them look good. The rotation for Retribution Paladin is still snappy, it's smooth, and you're hitting those Wake of Ashes windows every 30 seconds. The bottom line is that Ret Paladin is still the spec that you're used to, just a little bit leaner, a little bit more efficient, and tuned toward, you know, what feels good to press. Could it be a bit flashier and use a little bit more flair and changes? Sure, but there's no point in trying to change something and fix something that technically isn't broken. Ret Paladin's gameplay is still fun. They're still looking good toward midnight. Moving on next now, we actually have to talk about Frost Mage because surprisingly, it's in a really good spot in midnight so far. Blizzard has rebuilt this spec top to bottom with a brand new freezing and shattering system, and it solves a lot of Frost's old problems. The loop is pretty simple. You use your abilities to stack freezing, and you use Ice Lance to consume the stacks and shatter them to explode. So from a very basic core standpoint, you build freezing, you shatter them with Ice Lances. They also took out Icy Veins and replaced it with Ray of Frost, which interacts with their Apex talent really well, where it summons these Hands of Frost that come out from the ground and slam onto enemies. Visually, very, very cool stuff. It's something I've never seen in WoW before, so it's really awesome. And then the talent tree got overhauled as well. For example, Glacial Spike is built into Frostbolt now, where you occasionally get to use it. You get to summon your Water Elemental again, which is awesome. And the entirety of the tree is just so much more straightforward and easy to understand than ever. For example, you have a couple talents like Comet Storm and Fractured Frost that allow you to cleave very naturally without these awkward setups. And this whole new shatter system fixes Frost's like biggest weakness, in my opinion, which was bad scaling at high target scenarios. Now you build up these stacks, shatter them with Ice Lance, everything AoE pops and explodes. Very, very nice. The bottom line is that Frost is a very simple caster now in the new expansion. Easy core loop with way less button bloat and a tree packed with a ton of meaningful choices, so the variety is absolutely there in terms of builds. Moving on next, we do have to talk about the Arcane Mage. Now, with Arcane Mage, they condensed a lot of their kit, and one of the biggest problems with Arcane was that you would need a ton of weak auras to track whether you should Arcane Barrage or not, so they condensed that down a crap ton, and it's very straightforward when you need to Barrage now. It seems like at the moment there are 2 working builds for Arcane. One of them is Spellslinger, and this is kind of like the machine gun build, because I shit you not, it ends up being about 3 buttons in your rotation. That includes Arcane Barrage and Arcane Orb. The idea is that whenever you get a clear casting, you use it on Arcane Orb now, and that will also shoot an additional couple Arcane Orbs, which gives you stacks of salvo, which then you use through your Arcane Barrage ability. Not only that, the cooldown of Arcane Orbs is getting reset very, very quickly through Spellslinger. So as you can see on screen here, I'm literally just spamming a few buttons over and over and over again and dealing pretty good damage. I just think throughout the entirety of Midnight testing so far, it feels like they've done a lot of condensing with all the specs, but it feels like a bit too much for Arcane in my opinion. You do have your second build, which is Sun Fury. It's kind of similar to what it was before. Instead of having, you know, other ways to generate Arcane Orbs to full right after you barrage, now you're using clear casting to arcane missiles to generate you back to full, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a lot more fluid and you don't need weak auras to track. So I do think this is a much better gameplay design. Once again, with Sun Fury, if you've ever played the spec, immediately you'll notice that everything is very, very simplified. At this point, whenever you get a clear casting, dump the Arcane Barrage, use Arcane Missiles to get you back up, and then you use your brand new AoE filler, which is Arcane Pulse, to deal AoE damage, rinse and repeat. I'm personally not in love with this gameplay style of Arcane Mage. I think for Sun Fury, it's heading in a better direction, a lot more simple, but I think the skill ceiling got significantly lowered with this spec, and it is something I am a tad bit worried about. Overall, though, the class theme is still there. The rotation got easier and just a lot more digestible to learn. Moving on next to where things start to drop down a little bit, we actually have to talk about the Destruction Warlock. Now, I don't think this class is a loser per se because it's nowhere near Fire Mage, but the truth of the matter is that Destruction barely changed at all. Now, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I just would have liked some new flashy buttons or toys to play with. The talent tree has been cleaned up a bit and split down the middle. Left side is all about single target builds with Shadow Burn, Chaos Bolt, Soulfire, stuff like that, where the right side is focused on AoE with Cataclysm, Rain of Fire, Channel Demon Fire, and stuff. It's a little bit on the nose, and it's very plain Jane. I mean, if you're in Rage, you're going to be running the left side build, and if you're a Mythic Plus, you're going to be running the AoE side. And that's really it. There's no flexibility, not really much creativity. Gameplay-wise, it's still the classic Destruction loop. You build your shards with Incinerate, you use your Cataclysm to afflict everyone with Immolate, and then you use your Rain of Fire, builder spender style of gameplay. That is literally it. I do really like their Apex talent though, because visually it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen in WoW. You summon these large Titan destructive forces to shoot out from the sky and shatter onto your enemies. It is so cool. Check out the visual here. Really, really nice stuff. But Destruction, yeah, listen, if you liked it before, it's the same old, nothing's really changed. It's not going to blow your mind away like Unholy or Demonology, though. Additionally, now, when it comes to Fury, now, Fury didn't get completely reinvented like some of their specs, but they did get trimmed, they got tuned up, and I guess reshuffled in a couple different ways, if that's how you want to put it. The core gameplay is exactly the same. Bloodthirst, Raging Blow, Rampage, Whirlwind. That's pretty much it. Nothing's going to change about that. But Blizzard did rip out some button bloat, just like every other class in the game. They got rid of, you know, Onslaught, Ravager, Odin's Fury, a couple of their capstones, all of that is gone. But Avatar somehow, some way made it to the Fury Warrior spec. I'm not sure how that's possible, but it is what it is. Now, instead of juggling 3 cooldowns and then, you know, trying to line them up all at once for those big crit windows, you've got more of like a simplified rotation where damage is more focused and just predictable. You got a new talent called Rampaging Ruin, which actually feels pretty good. It lets Rampage cleave if you hit a certain amount of targets, up to 8 targets if you got your Whirlwind stacks up, which makes Fury, you know, more legit in AoE, so I guess it's better. You also get a new talent for utility called Battlefield Commander, which buffs your Rally and Cry, Battle Shout, to give them things like Leech, movement speed to your whole group, so I think Fury desperately needs this, and Warrior in general desperately needs this sort of thing, so that's a plus. But there is still a vibe that's missing here. You know, a couple of talents, they seem cool on paper, but either of them are just too mathy or just straight up just too impractical. Like, their capstone killer be killed. No one's going to take that in PvE. It's not really going to be used. It's literally a PvP thing. I think it needs to get reworked. I think their talents need to be adjusted. I'm not completely sold on them yet. It feels very similar to what it has been. I would say it did get improved, but not exactly thrilling at all, if that makes sense. The specs at the point where it can get the changes it needs to be great, or it can stay the same and probably be on the lower end of class changes heading into the expansion, which I'm nervous about. Moving on next, we do have to talk about Survival Hunter, and man, this one pains me to say because I actually don't think Survival's in an absolutely awful spot. I know a lot of people are going to be affected by this big thematic change. It's pretty much being rebuilt from the ground up. It's moving away from that hunter style to now a guy who's all about throwing bombs, Molotov cocktails, shotguns, explosives, and stuff like that. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. They just need to fully lean into it. They need to, hold nothing back and lean into that style entirely. One thing that is cool is now you can dual wield one-handers now instead of being stuck with spears. So that's a pretty cool little change. The real shift, of course, is the explosive thing, pretty much being embedded into the entire kit. You have ability that is just a Molotov cocktail. You throw it down, it explodes. You have a boomstick where you shoot out a shotgun and a cone, replacing Fury the Eagle, and then some passives and stuff like sticky bombs and wildfire shells that sort of tie everything together with a nice little bow and ribbon. You also have an ability called Takedown now that replaces Coordinated Assault that calls your pet to leap at enemies and amp your own damage. And then they also have their Apex talent, which is called Raptor Strike, where it just has your pet go in there, deal an AoE swipe. Listen, I'm going to be honest. If they're going to go full on with this explosive Grenader engineer style of play, they need to go all out. Maybe have him summon a turret. Maybe have him go in there, shoot a grenade launcher. I don't care. Anything other than trying to do this half and half, because I think it's pretty lame thematically, and I just don't like it. If they do something completely different, it will bring more eyes to Survival Hunter. It will get people potentially playing it, and I think it has some visual flavor potential here, but right now it's just really weird mechanical confusion. I don't like it. I think it's in a decent spot, but it definitely could be better. Moving on next, we do have to talk about Assassination Rogue. I think they're in a pretty decent spot. They didn't get a flashy rework, but it did get some tune-ups, and those changes do matter. If you've played Assassination before, the spec is going to feel very similar. Just a little bit smoother, a little bit faster, and way less reliant on awkward, trying to get in stealth gimmicks before every pull in Mythic Plus, so that's a W. The biggest win, I would say, is that Crimson Tempest is now a builder, not a finisher, and it spreads your bleeds to nearby targets. That means you don't need stealth to, get your AoE dots rolling anymore. You just Fan of Knives, you dot everything up, you Crimson Tempest a couple times, and the whole, pack is bleeding out with all your dots and everything. It's a little bit more intuitive. I like it. The core gameplay is still Garrote, Rupture, and Envenom, and now Blizzard is really rewarding you for mastering that Envenom timing, because there are new talents that boost your energy regen based on how many Envenoms you get off in a short window, which adds to a cool little pressure loop where you're constantly trying to push for that next payoff window, which I think is pretty interesting. Kingsbane also ties into everything as well. The more Envenoms you weave in while your Kingsbane is up, the harder it will ramp. It's all about, chaining those big bleeds, poisons, finishers in those short, bursty windows, and then you have those cooldown periods where you're just letting your dots do their thing. The bottom line is that Assassination is still all about that, clean, efficient poison and bleed pressure. No more cheesy stealth requirements or anything, so it's definitely heading in the right direction. I think it could have used a little bit more flashiness and changes. If you've ever played Assassination, it is almost exactly the same. Heading into a new expansion, I would have liked some things changed, but it is what it is. I still think it's technically a win in my book, just dead smack in the middle. Following Destruction Warlock, we do have to speak about the Augmentation Evoker. Now, this class didn't get a substantial amount of changes, and I think it's a little bit frustrating because I really want this spec to change either into a full-blown tank or a DPS option. Having one support is not a good option in World of Warcraft at this point unless you add more supports, so no matter what, it's always going to be a black sheep and impossible to balance. Anyways, moving into it, Augmentation's raid micromanagement has been massively simplified. Ebon Might will now apply raid-wide to all DPS within 100 yards. You don't need to cherry pick, who gets what anymore. It's just smoother and closer, and, you pop Ebon Might, and that's it. To balance that, Ebon Might's power is split evenly amongst everybody, so that's fine. And then Breath of Eons now summons a time duplicate of yourself due to your Apex talent that mirrors your abilities. I actually think this is one of the coolest things about augmentation. It just goes to show how important Apex talents actually are in terms of rating, and it's probably the saving grace for this spec so far. Additionally, Breath of Eon's debuff and the whole temporal wound thing is now visible to everybody with the tooltip, so that's, I guess, helpful in terms of lining up your cooldowns. I will say overall, they got some pruning, nothing too crazy. The result is just pretty much that augmentation is still the, raid stat battery, but now you don't need spreadsheets to sort of play it right and, micromanage only 1 to 2 people. You kind of just press your abilities, you forget it, you go about it. I still think it needs a rework. I don't know, I guess we'll see how things go in the future. And I will say last and finally least, we have the Fire Mage. Now, I was a Fire Mage main in the final season of The War Within, and I was doing really, really good on this spec. It was very high skill ceiling, and it ended up being a really nice little chore mastering this spec. I will say it straight up, I don't like the direction they took Fire Mage at all. Don't get me wrong, I never liked machine gun sort of pyroblasting flame strike style of gameplay because it was a little too fast-paced, and I think it was a little goofy at times, being just a wet noodle pyroblast spamming class. What they're doing in Midnight is slowing down Fire Mage's gameplay drastically. It is by far the biggest change of any class kit in the entire game heading into Midnight. Now, I do think it's a good route when it comes to slowing them down a little bit, but the truth of the matter is they hammered it way, way, way too hard home, and it feels like a worse version of Cataclysm or even like Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King Fire Mage. I don't love it. They took away Phoenix Flame, so that's just completely gone. You get combustion every minute and a half, and there's no way of reducing the cooldown, by the way. And I feel like they're just going this route of a much slower gameplay style with a very poor iteration of it, and it's just not good. I don't personally think they should, but it might be a better option to just bring back the old school combustion where it leaves a big fat damage over time effect on enemies. That feels more like the theme the spec is heading toward right now, rather than the machine gun, super fast-paced, automatic crit gameplay style. I've played every spec on the alpha right now, and I'm being completely honest when I say Fire Mage is in a very, very bad spot, and it needs to be reworked. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap up our video on the best and worst specs so far when it comes to DPS on the Midnight Alpha. If you guys enjoyed the content, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you're interested in seeing more content from us, check out our socials down in the comment section below. Oh, also, do not forget, ladies and gentlemen, the Comeback Kids are doing a Midnight Epic Edition free giveaway. So click the link in the description below. Follow some of our other platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and X because we are posting on there now. Greatly increase the chance you get this awesome prize from the Comeback Kids. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content, consider subscribing or check out one of the videos you see on screen here to stay up to date on all things Warcraft. My name's Sky for the Comeback Kids. It's an absolute pleasure to make content for you all. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.